Hi, my name is Hannah Gibson, and the book I chose for my report is Liberation, Being the Adventures of the Slick Six After the Collapse of the United States of America by Brian Francis Slattery. It was published in October 2008 by Tom Doherty Associates LLC in New York City. And it's a fiction novel, and it's post-apocalyptic, and it's got a lot of action and a lot of sort of fantastical elements, but it's also really realistic, and it's a warning about how we treat the planet that we live on, and what we do to it, and the priorities that we have right now, how they can sort of lead to our destruction, on machinery and progress and all this stuff. Is it really worth it, basically? And it's organized into 3 sections. And the first section starts off on a prison ship that was sent out to sea 6 years earlier because there's so much overcrowding, which is something that we can obviously foresee happening right now with our prison systems. And while this ship is out to sea, the United States of America dissolves. It collapses, the dollar is worthless. There are a lot of things leading up to this, but the novel starts with that happening. And when this ship hears about it, it's basically the prisoners break out. You find out that the slave trade has been resurfaced now with the collapse because there's no laws, and you can make money and off of that type of stuff, I guess. And so some of the wardens are traded into slavery for other resources and food and such and things so they can survive, so they can make their way back to the United States. Because the dollar is worthless, so they can't trade it for money or anything. So people trade for goods. And as they reach New York City, you get a sense of what the country is like. As their ship pulls into the harbor, people are jumping and taking off everything they can from the ship to use to trade or to use for their homes or whatever. You don't really know. And they are given some yen in exchange for that, the prisoners are. So you find out that not all paper money is worthless anymore. Yen obviously still works. And not all governments have dissolved, but the United States of America is, when it collapsed, and in the chaos that preceding it, it's everywhere. It's omnipresent, even though not every country has collapsed. It's obviously a state of chaos in the world. And you meet the protagonist, Marco, and you find out that Marco was sent to prison by this guy called the Aardvark, who sort of paid off all the judges and the jury and sent Marco away unfairly. And you find out that this Aardvark, now that they're back in New York City, he's in this big black spindly tower surrounded by crows, and he's in charge of everything, basically. He gets a cut from the slave trade. He uses his power and his wealth to be in a position of power, even though there is no government. And people are afraid of him, basically. And that's how he stays in power. So you find out that Marco was a member of this group called the Slick Six, and that they pulled off heists and stuff, and that's why he went to prison. And they targeted the Aardvark a lot, and that's why he got them sent away, even though the Aardvark himself was a criminal in his day. Criminal is a worthless term now because there's no government, no laws, so everybody and nobody is a criminal. And when he touches ground again, he really wants to find the rest of the Slick Six because they're the closest thing to family that he's ever really had. And 2 of them in New York City, and they said that, and he goes up to them and he says, I have this plan, I want to reunite with Slick Six and pull off the biggest heist we've ever had, or ever done, or ever attempted. And the 2, Nerve and Koala, their names, are hesitant, but they tell him where another one of the members is, and this is the one that was closest to Margot. His name is Zeke Hezekiah, and he's under the Aardvark's control in a prison in New York City. And so Marco goes and liberates him from prison, and then they go off to Asheville, North Carolina, to find another member, Johanna, who is the mayor of Asheville as a free city, no slaves or anything, and it has guards, and she has her own sort of government set up, and the city is actually pretty prosperous, and they only let a certain amount of people in. There's guards at the gates and everything. And we find out that her and Marco had a love affair, and she doesn't really want to go on her plan, probably because of this history with that. But then Zeke and Marco go on to Texas to find another member, Danisha, and she runs this sort of news corporation in Texas. And so you find out that even though There's no media, there's no gas, there's not a lot of transfer of information at the scale that we're used to right now, obviously, but people are still finding things out. People are, there's radios, people are being resourceful, and, there's still travel of information. And so those three set off to liberate the last two members of the Slick Six, Hideo and Carolyn, who have sold themselves into slavery, like many people at the time, sold themselves into slavery in California because they're starving. They had no food, no money, and even though, slavery obviously isn't something you're like, oh, I want to sell myself into it. You're guaranteed a bed, even if it's straw on the floor, and you're guaranteed food, even if it's the feed they give to the cows. So they go to California and they liberate these slaves, and they start sort of this revolt, which sparks a fire revolt around the country with slaves. And that has a lot to do with putting Marco's plan into concrete realization. He decides he wants to liberate everyone. And it becomes clear that he wants to liberate everyone from the aardvark. He wants to have a revolution. He wants to get the slave trade and the corruption out and let America build itself up again through the ashes. And throughout the novel, many things unfold, and in the end, they achieve this. And it doesn't really say what happens after this liberation, but there's a real sense of hope for the country. This is a really meandering novel almost, and he switches seamlessly from one point of view to the next. He can switch from one character to another, not even chronologically. It could be one character's in this place, in a desert, and then it will use those scenery things and then transform into a memory of another person in the same place from a long time ago, and it's just really great. It's really great to read. It was really interesting. He's a great writer. I would definitely. He only has one other book, but I think I'm going to read it, called Spaceman Blues. I have some passages that are pertinent to our environmentally conscious sort of feel, and that's the reason why I chose it. So let me find some here. Sorry, it's just sitting here. Okay, there's one character who is sort of like a hippie guru, and he's in charge of this big group called the Americanoids, who are really hippie, and they do a lot of drugs, and they travel around America, or what was America, on a bus. And he's really in touch with what the planet wants. You get that sense from him a lot. And this is just him musing at the end of a chapter about progress and how everyone in America strives for progress, and he sort of sees the folly in it, like why. So here we go. I'll start. He now understands that this expectation of progress applies only to young nations, for most of the planet lives among the ruins of dead empires. Angkor Wat, the great Zimbabwe, roamed the Mughal palaces. The plumbing in Lisbon, 500 years old. The ancestral pyramids and roads in Central America and what the Spaniards did to them. Progress is a soothing lie, thinks Dr. San Diego's addled brain. And for over 2 centuries, all of North America lay swooning under its comfort. So you can sort of see that maybe Slattery is suggesting that all of our strive for progress and expansion and exploitation of the land has sort of led us to where we are in this novel, in this state of chaos and, sort of regretting everything. Because there really is that sense, the whole American Manifest Destiny thing, and you have that sense too with some other characters of a Native American tribe who helped Marco follow through with this revolution called the New Sui, and they go about doing acts of retribution to what everyone's ancestors did to them, basically. Okay, there are some towns that are able to actually live happier and almost feel like maybe this collapse is for the best because they're able to adapt and live quietly with their families, and it's a real community sense, and people are happy, and that's a recurring theme in the novel. And one of those towns is actually Las Vegas. And And I chose a quote from them because it's not, all these things are failing, but it's not the earth, it's the machinery, and it's what we use to exploit it. And if we would just go with the earth, we would be better. So here's one passage I can find that. Okay. Las Vegas residents hiked up into the mountains to the sand flats of Lake Mead baked into cracking, expected to see the basin empty, a bright white band beginning hundreds of feet up on the hills where the water had bleached the rocks. Hoover's shattered shell in the cleft of the valley, the river rolling far below, still chewing on its release. But the water was still there, chafed by the wind into whipping waves. It was the pumps that were working. The machinery had failed. Something had gone into the intake and wasn't coming back out. So that shows like the folly of relying on machines. You think the water's not working, but really it's the machines. So if we take away that emphasis, maybe we would be better off. Maybe we won't lead to that. The last quote I have for this video is, let's see here, shows, it's sort of a comic view of New York City, which is where the author is from, actually, so don't take offense if you really like New York City, because obviously he likes something about it. But it just shows the folly, basically, in the way that we live and all the priorities that we have, by just explaining a day in New York City, basically. The tourist told them about how crowded it was around New York, how you could sit in your car and go 5 miles in 3 hours, couldn't walk down the sidewalk in a straight line. They could see it on television, in the movies, people hanging off of straps on screeching subways, staggering off commuter buses. And the money was weird. The stocks rocketing up and crashing down, people buying one-bedroom apartments in tenement buildings for $2 million, people living on $2 a day. Cars that cost as much as houses, only to be chewed on by the salt of northeastern highways in the winter. People taking cars and trains 6 hours a day to work and back, penthouses, public housing. Most expensive slice of air in the country, poorest congressional district. People on television in suits and ties shrieking about these issues as hundreds more in suits and ties shouted at each other behind them, as though it all mattered. And that's from the point of view of someone who lives in one of these small, adapted towns in the middle country, and how he says he never wants to leave this town that he's in. He never wants to go there. And he stays there after the collapse, and he actually keeps this town running on their own resources really great, a town of Lindsberg. And there are a lot of towns like that, like Las Vegas, Los Angeles is one of them. So even though there's this post-apocalyptic sense, there's this chaos, destruction of the United States, that seems scary and terrible, there's actually a lot of people who end up living off the land and feeling better about it. So I think that really serves a great purpose. It's really just, the book really makes you think about things that you prioritize and how instead of exploiting from the earth is really way more powerful than we are. And if we're going to choose to enter this fight with it, we have no chance. And the earth is really characterized as a human being itself. It's breathing, waiting, watching, waiting for the perfect time to take revenge. Its sea levels are rising and eating up people that have, polluted it and ruined it. And it almost parallels with the way the Native Americans of the Nisui tribe are giving out these acts of retribution. And it's just a call for a change and a reevaluation in the way that we view the planet. It was a really great book. It was interesting and action-filled, and it wasn't that hard to read at all, even though it's a regular-sized book. And so I would recommend it to anybody that likes action, basically, or there's also some romance, and there's a lot of revenge. A lot of themes are revenge. And there's a lot of just other themes throughout the book. There's one theme of people wanting people who don't want them, which I left that out, obviously, because it has nothing to do with the environment, really, but it's almost in so many different characters. It's just tied throughout the book, and it goes along with the way that he seamlessly goes from one point of view to the next. He's just a really great writer, and he really developed this plot. It seems like it's such a chaotic book, but there's actually this really deep organization that runs throughout it. And it was really great. He's a really good author. So, all right, thank you.